Welcome to Inside Athletic Training, a podcast from the Professional Baseball Athletic Trainer Society and the ultimate destination for athletic training professionals, students, and educators looking to learn more about sports medicine and athletic training. In each episode, we'll dive headfirst into conversations with experts in the field, bringing you insights, stories, and cutting-edge information about athletic training and sports medicine. This week on Inside Athletic Training, we welcome in Keith Duggar, the Senior Medical Director and Head Athletic Trainer for the Colorado Rockies. Enjoy the show. All right, Doogie, welcome to Inside Athletic Training. Super excited to have you on for our 52nd episode. You're currently in your 25th year in the big leagues with the Rockies. You lead the medical staff as the Senior Medical Director and Head Athletic Trainer there in Colorado. We'll get into your career path and all that good stuff and the details there in a bit here. But first, I want to kind of share a little background info about you and what paths led you to where you are today. So share with the listeners a little bit about you, where you're from, if you were an athlete or anything growing up, and how you found your passion for athletic training.
Sure. Yeah. I was born and raised in Northern California, a small town called Loomis, California, in the foothills just outside of Sacramento on the way to Lake Tahoe. Grew up in a household where my dad was first and foremost a baseball coach and football coach. So I was around athletics all the time. Two of my uncles were coaches in the area. Kind of born and raised in a baseball family. My dad played college ball, a little bit of, semi-professional ball. I played a little college ball at San Diego State and at a junior college, and realized I wasn't the best player. And, I kind of found my passion early in my schooling of trying to be an athletic trainer. And I thought, hey, what a cool job is possibly to work in the profession in baseball. And, kind of saw the light, and that's the path I chose.
And I want to start today by talking a little more about your career path, kind of before you started working in the big leagues with the Rockies. You navigated minor league life just like many of your colleagues across the league. I know you spent 9 seasons in minor league baseball leading up to your big league debut. Share with us a little bit about that experience in the minor leagues. I know it's hugely important for a lot of athletic trainers across the league to get that experience, get your hands wet, and kind of make mistakes as you can at a low risk environment. So what did the minor leagues kind of teach you about you as a professional?
Yeah, I'm going to start from the very beginning, though, kind of like how I got involved to even want to go into professional sport. Like I said, I was a college baseball player, and then I was a college athletic trainer for 2 years in working baseball. That's where I found my passion, was when I was in college working as an athletic trainer for the baseball program. And then I was trying to get my foot in the door like all young trainers. And, it was a very hard step in your career path. So back then we didn't have social media to like email out. So I wrote letters to all the major league clubs. And I did this probably for 2 years before people were reaching back out to me. I think I was pretty determined of what I wanted to do. I just didn't know how to do it. And I finally had one of my, actually he was a grad assistant ahead of me when I was in my undergrad. He was working in minor league ball, and he kind of got me my first foot in the door to just have an interview. And I was with the San Diego Padres. So I actually interviewed with them, and I interned for 2 springs with them while I was still in school. I'd come out to Yuma, Arizona, and work about a month. And that's actually what really got it going for me. So that was like a working resume. They got to see, one, if my personality was going to work in this profession. 2, kind of my skill set. I was still very young at that time. But I had some pretty good schooling, and, I worked in some rehab clinics in San Diego, in the local area there. And I said, hey, Todd Hutchins was there. He was the head of the minor leagues at that time in AAA. And he was kind of like my mentor and kind of set me on my career path. So eventually, I think begging enough the Padres, and they saw me for a couple of interns. When a position opened, I got my first job in rookie ball in the summer in Arizona. And then I finally got my first seasonal job the next year, short season, up in Spokane, Washington. And kind of like what you said, you jump into minor league ball, you don't have mentors working with you. You learn on the job training. So, I mean, a lot of mistakes, right, at that time. But I had some older coaches that kind of took me under their wing of kind of the pros and cons of where an athletic trainer fit in. And, and I also had the old telephone where I could make a phone call to some of the guys that were in higher levels besides rookie ball and short seasons that kind of helped me along the way. And from there, I worked Spokane 2 years, and then I went out to Charleston, South Carolina. I worked winter ball a little bit in Mexico. I worked Arizona Fall League a couple years. Went over to Dominican, got my opportunity to kind of get my feet wet over there to work a little bit. And, eventually I was in the position in the minor leagues with the Padres just trying to move up. But I don't want to say I was roadblocked. I just had senior guys that had been there and great athletic trainers. George Polis was ahead of me, Steve Sales, Jim Daniels, and Hutch. All these guys eventually made it to big leagues, whether it was with the Padres or other organizations. And I learned so much from them, and we learned so much as a group that we kind of fed off of each other. And then when I heard there was going to be an expansion team, and I heard, Colorado, I was like, man, maybe that's an opportunity for me to kind of, move over and go up the old ladder there. So there were some people from the front office of the Padres that, helped start the Rockies organization. So I kind of had it in there. And actually, when the Rockies started, this was in '92, they only had a rookie ball team, and there was instructional league. They didn't have enough players for instructional league, so they were co-op with the Padres. So I was the trainer for the Padres, and Tom Probst, who was the head trainer ahead of me here with the Rockies, was the trainer for the instructional team for the Rockies. So I got to work directly with Tom at that time, and we kind of clicked our personalities together. As he did things a little bit different than me. He was a PT-ATC. He had been away from the game for a while, where I was, kind of young and coming back up in the game. So we kind of balanced each other off, and that was kind of my foot in the door of getting the interview with the Rockies. And I was very excited when I had the opportunity to come over and work in the Rockies organization. We only had one minor league team at that time, so we were going to expand from a short season team to an A-ball team to a AAA team. We didn't have AA. So they actually had an older gentleman in AAA, and they said, hey, we don't have anyone to kind of run our extended spring and do our rehab down here. Would you be interested? For me, I felt like maybe my career path was a step down, but a potential to make a jump. So I said, yeah. So I came over to the Rockies before we actually had the title of /rehab coordinator, and I kind of worked in that role for a year. And then the following year, I went from Bend, Oregon, in an extended spring up to AA. So I opened up our AA club in New Haven. I believe that was in '94. And then in '95, I think, through the end of '98 or '99, I was in AAA. But, I loved the opportunity at every step. I learned a lot from all the players and managers and coaches that I worked with, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. I think, gaining that experience, like I said initially, what intrigued me was when you work baseball, you're by yourself. But as all trainers do in baseball, you find out quickly that you're not just an athletic trainer. You find out that you might be. Back then, I was a clubhouse guy too, right? I was the travel secretary. I was doing contracts, just because we had some other skills that there was only two coaches with a minor league club, so there's two coaches and a trainer. So, and again, with my baseball background, I could do some of the baseball stuff, whether that was helping out hitting fungos or catching bullpens or throwing BP. I did it all. Heck, I even drove a bus a couple times because I had my license. And, I look back, and when I tell kids this, they laugh. But, the guys that came before me, they did a lot of this type of work. You're borderline a clubhouse guy. You're a trainer. You're a coach. You're all those other things that we are nowadays. But there just wasn't the manpower, and you were the only one that could do it. So you gain experience very fast. But again, like I said, nobody's perfect when they start out. You could go on your first road trip. Nobody told me I had to pack a helmet bag. I didn't know. I assumed players and coaches take care of it, right? So going on a first road trip by myself, everything was pretty smooth. Got the hotels all set up, the buses, but I didn't pack the stupid helmet bag. They didn't teach me that part in school, how to map that out. So a little practice and experience, it got better. And when I finally had my opportunity to, get to the big leagues, I put my name in with some other clubs, but I finally got the call with the Rockies. It was a great ride, and I got to work with Tom Probst, who was the head trainer ahead of me, and he was a wonderful mentor. We were partners. He didn't necessarily overlook me every time I was doing something. He tried to empower me, and not be afraid to make mistakes. And I feel that's kind of passed down to me, when I'm working with young kids. And that's one of the first things I tell them: don't be afraid to make a few mistakes.
Yep.
Everyone makes mistakes.
Mm-hmm. And looking back,
that's kind of how I made it to the big league.
Yeah, that's a great story, and appreciate sharing all that insight. Looking back on those times in the minor leagues, obviously so many unique experiences for you with the Rockies being an expansion team and kind of finding your way on the fly. A lot of people who we speak to who are in your position now, head athletic trainers across the league, mention that it's important for younger athletic trainers not to think, number one, that they know everything, and number two, that they're above any certain task or skill, like, being the traveling secretary or driving the bus, like you mentioned. Outside of that, is there any, advice that you have for, let's say, the younger athletic trainer who might be heading to their first spring training this year? Is there any, skills or personality traits or just characteristics that you advise as being super important for a younger professional?
I think it's important to be a good listener first, right? Before you're talking. Mm-hmm. I don't mean that in a bad way. I mean, kind of see how things are operating first before you suggest changes, if that makes sense. Number two, ask a lot of questions, right? If you don't understand. I'd say that's one thing I've never been afraid of. I don't care if it's my mentors or if it's, orthos I've worked with or other therapists or professors. If you don't understand it, ask the why, and maybe they can clarify it a different way for you so you can understand it. And then after, kind of learning the why, then you could come up with your own ideas and give input. But if you come in so gung-ho, like you've done it before, like in your system from your, various universities or clinics that you worked at, you can sometimes offend people, I'm not saying don't lose that kind of edge, that excitement. Don't do that, because you're going to have plenty of opportunity when you're with your own team. But in spring training, it's teamwork, right? So you have to work as a team. You make collective decisions, and more importantly, you have great debates, right? You're not all going to agree on how to do things, and this is where senior trainers have the experience, right? The history that they can fall back on. And that's when we have to be pretty clear in our communication of, we do it this way because of what we're talking about. Fail results from the past, right? And, we can kind of skip ahead a couple times. But again, I think the number one thing is be a great communicator, a great listener, and don't just sit back and ask why.
And now, as the leader of the Rockies staff, you're in a position where you're communicating to younger athletic trainers all the way, down to someone at their first year on the job. But one thing that's obviously hugely important in the profession is making sure that all the people working under you are developing, learning new skills, getting into positions where they can succeed. So now, you have so much experience leading this staff in Colorado. How do you go about making sure that people under you are continuing to learn and grow and eventually hopefully get their shot at a position like yours?
But I think it's kind of what I touched on a little bit is empower them, right? And I want all young athletic trainers to strive for their goals, their personal goals and professional goals. If their goal is to, be a head athletic trainer and take my position, then my job as a leader is to try and develop them and put them in those positions as best as I can at the right time, right? You can't speed up the process like any professional. You have to rely on the process and the timing. So, some kids come in, they work 1 year in minor ball, and they think they're ready for, high AAA or big leagues.
Mm-hmm.
There's so much more you have to learn. It's not just the athletic training part. That's the easy part as you move up the ladder. It's more the business side, right? The kind of being the gatekeeper of many different avenues, not only in your sports medicine department, but heck, it could be part of the analytic. It could be part of baseball ops. It could be part of scouting. So understand that, depending on what their personal goals are, which I have to understand, that part of my development plan is to work directly with them and making sure that they're achieving some of these goals. And the other thing is when we're making moves sometimes with our trainers, I've made moves where I've had people on higher levels and moved them back down. And sometimes they feel like it's a punishment. Mm-hmm. And it's not a punishment at all. It's a growth opportunity. That's the way I see it. But you have to clarify that to them so they're not upset, And I think when you're open and honest and you're doing evaluations ongoing from the very beginning, kind of how I do it or, suggestions, and you make them part of the process, they're going to buy into you a little bit more. And then you're not going to blindside them at the very end of the year when you're going to do, your final evaluation.
Yeah, great insight there in terms of, leading a staff in Major League Baseball from you. One thing I've really always admired about the Rockies staff is the continuity. So you mentioned Tom Probst, recently retired, legend in the field of athletic training, super intelligent and one of the nicest guys anyone will ever meet. You guys were together forever. You and your staff now have been together for a long time. Is there anything you credit in terms of keeping the staff together and the continuity to kind of like build a program there with such great group of people that stick around together?
Well, I think the number one thing is we're a family, right? I kind of see it as I'm the big brother, right? Trying to help out the little brother, make them comfortable, make them feel like they're worthy, even at the lowest level, that they have power in their words, meaning that someone's listening to them. Again, being involved in their goals that they've set, I think is important. And, continuity is great, right? I love that I have the same guys with me all the time. But again, it depends on what their goals are. If my guys have the opportunity to go to, to be a head trainer at another organization, I'm going to do everything I can to get them there.
Sure.
We don't have too much turnaround because our front office, our baseball ops department, they don't treat us as an adjunct, other position. They make us part of baseball ops, which that was part of Tom Probst kind of going into that director position from the very beginning. So we've always had a big say with our front office, and a voice at the table, instead of us relaying to a farm director or straight to the GM. When Tom's up there basically with a board of directors, you have someone right there with ownership, right? And that's kind of the role I'm in too. I'm changing my title a little bit different, my job requirements a little bit different Tom's is in other organizations. but we still have that voice upstairs, that Tom taught us, and it's worked for us. And you look around now, and almost every club in any professional sport has a senior director or a director, right? And Tom was one of the grandfathers of this. He helped develop it, and I helped him, and we had great front office people that envisioned it from the beginning, which was important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's one thing I wanted to touch on today as well, is kind of the Rockies pioneering that, medical director or someone up in the front office like Tom Probst, who for so many years was a liaison between you and the front office and did an amazing job there. And seemingly, like you mentioned, every team across the league, if not most, have added a position like that. Do you see now that, someone in a head athletic trainer position, there's just too much going on for them to act as that, front office liaison as well, or in terms of how the positions go together? I know you're managing both roles, but do you think that's just a necessary position that the Rockies were way out in front of in terms of creating?
I think we definitely were on the forefront of it, creating, kind of the balance act of traditional athletic training and, medical director. It's different everywhere. I'm different than Tom was. Tom was moved straight upstairs and was involved a lot more in the minor leagues, right? And kind of the affiliate physicians and that kind of stuff, where I'm still involved in that, but I've empowered some of the minor league trainers that they control that. Where my roles changed a little bit different. I'm kind of work with the scouting department a little bit. I work with our general manager. So, you can talk to Ken Crenshaw with the Diamondbacks, or Ron Porterfield, or Jamie Reed, or anyone. Everyone's just a little bit different, right? And again, it's what you want to do. Are you at the point in your career, do you want to step back and maybe not travel all the time? That's part of the decision too, right? I'll take some time off, miss a few trips here and there to balance it out. But I love to get out to the affiliates too, to see how the minor leagues are operating, which I think kind of keeps your continuity between your organization flowing well when they see, kind of elder trainers going down to the minor leagues or the grassroots or down to Dominican Republic, and they see that we're going over there. I think that's important. And, and again, the athletic trainer profession is one of those professions where nobody says no. If there's a new task thrown to us, myself, or, any of my peer groups with other teams, we take the lead. It could be tobacco. It could be COVID. It could be pandemic stuff. Athletic trainers are just, they know how to get organized. They know how to rely on their team members, and they'll address it. And if they don't address it, they're great about getting on the phone and picking some other people's brains on how to do it better, right? And that's one of the things I love about the profession is you don't just have to do one thing anymore. And, now the evolution of, true sports science and baseball, there's other avenues we could go into, some of the analytics, some of the sports science stuff. So there's always these kind of shoot-offs of the profession that I see, just growing in other ways.
Yeah, and one additional thing about, that I've heard from many of your colleagues in director positions across the league is sometimes heading upstairs and traveling less. They kind of miss the old days of working with their hands, being with the players, communicating in the training room, kind of like the old days coming up. I know you're still heavily involved in both aspects, but is that something you kind of foresee yourself missing when those days are older for you and you're doing less of the hands-on work in the training room?
Yeah, I'll kind of compare it to an older athlete, right? Your body starts breaking down. Our minds are still pretty young, right? But sometimes we just can't do the physical activity as we start to age, and we do have to back off a little bit. And that's sometimes when we take on more of the kind of administration roles at times. But, I'm still able to work. I'm still able to get my hands on. I still able to make those connections with the players and relate a little bit, even though I'm getting up there. I think that's important, right? You got to know your time frame, not only physically, but also mentally how you're actually connecting with players. And when you start to see that slide, I think that's when you got to be a little bit more creative in your profession to maybe look at some other avenues, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And you're such a veteran of the industry with so much experience, 25 years now with the Rockies in the big leagues. Athletic training in that time frame has changed so much, and there's so much new technology, innovation, like you previously mentioned, job opportunities becoming available because of that technology. Do you kind of have a vision for where athletic training is going as these staffs grow to really huge amounts with so many staff members?
Yeah, first of all, you work in a profession of a science. It's an evolution. Things always change, right? So there's new surgical techniques, which makes there's new rehab techniques for us. So you got to try to stay up to date as much as you can. If you're not able to stay up to date, you got to have one of your assistants or one of your partners being able to keep you up to date as much as possible. Number two is it's not just about having multiple hands on to do the work. You got to have the right people, right? And sometimes you got to filter people out if they're not able to connect with the players or basically communicate. That's probably the number one thing is you got to be a great communicator in this position. And as the science goes, we're playing a sport. You got to make it still a sport. You can't just treat players like they're lab rats, right? Mm-hmm. So you got to pick and choose what avenue you want to test. And that can start at the ground roots of your assessments, right? From basic stuff to strength to range of motion to, some pretty high-tech testing. And, in the big leagues, we have a collective bargaining agreement. So we have to be careful about any assessments that are giving numbers, right? Mm-hmm. And you also have to understand what these numbers are. Can these numbers hurt a player based on a score? I don't like doing any type of research, science projects, analytics if it's going to hurt a player. First and foremost, when we do these assessments or testing, the information should go directly to the player first. And you're going to relay the same information to the player as you are to the coaching staff and the front office. And that's going to keep you neutral, and the players are going to respect you that you're not just collecting data to use against them. And agents will buy in if you do it the right way.
Yeah, very interesting to hear. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm a little concerned also on, losing some of the human touch, right? You got AI coming. So I think AI, like anything, whether you're writing a paper or doing a research project or if it's a new surgical technique that doctors are using, you got to be very careful because AI doesn't have the history or the experiences, right, about the failures that could happen. It's only predictive models of what has been inputted into it. And again, if you lose that human touch, then all you are is just, you're like a modality that is just going to be used every now and then because now players are going to want data from a computer. Mm-hmm. And I have a fear. Baseball stayed pretty traditional, and we're moving more towards this area, but I'm a little bit guarded. I just say I had the yellow flag up. Just be cautious of how you're going to utilize the information.
Sure. Yeah, and one thing I'm shifting gears a bit that I'm super excited to talk to you about within all the information and the testing and the specialization is actually youth sports specialization and kind of that avenue. I know you're very active in research with USA Baseball and PitchSmart, and you also have a son who is playing collegiate baseball this coming year. Can you talk about how you guys maybe approach sports specialization for your kids or younger players in your system who are getting into baseball seriously? I know there's so much information out there about arm issues and year-round throwing, but I'd love to hear your perspective on youth sports specialization, for young baseball players.
Yeah, this changes all the time for me. I think when kids are young, and I'm going to use the ages, let's say 5 to 16. I think kids should play every sport they want to play. They should play multiple sports. They should take breaks from the one sport type of thing. But the problem is the way baseball has been developed in all sports now, when they get to a certain age, they almost force the issue where it has to go into some specialization, for a single sport, especially if you're living in some states. It's basically you're trying to keep up with the next person. Now the great, well-rounded athlete is always going to excel, but, maybe the kid that is a little underdeveloped, that's trying to keep up with a kid that's more developed at 17, 18, he's going to have to put a little bit more work in towards that sport, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. Pitch Smart was just an opportunity on that board and all the brains that were working into it. It's not perfect, but what it wanted to do is just teach coaches, parents, trainers, therapists that, hey, we got to watch out, man. We're seeing way too many injuries with these kids, especially arm issues, the elbows and the shoulders, and they're throwing way too hard, too soon. Again, you mentioned my own son, who was a little younger for his class and not as mature as a lot of kids. Part of the problem is now at 12 years old, and I'm not criticizing these programs, but they put grades on kids at 12 years old. So, typically the kids with the highest grades are the fastest, strongest, and the hardest throwers, right? So what's a kid want to do? He wants to keep up with that kid, so his grade's harder. So they're training different than they used to, 20, 25 years ago. They're throwing balls year-round. They're putting radar guns on kids from 12 to 15 years old. Yeah. So I think the whole game itself in the development plan is a little bit backwards. USA Baseball is doing a great job trying to adjust some of this. Some of the other groups out there are putting some guidelines now, for the past, I'd say, 5-6 years, which are really good. But, there's so many outreach programs, too, besides their schools or their clubs, that this is wear and tear on the kids, too. So the parents might think they're doing justice sending kids to certain places, but if a kid's throwing every single day or every other day in the off season at max effort, that compounded wear and tear is only going to hurt them when they're in their later years, the end of their teen years, or if they get into college. So a lot of the injuries that we see aren't when they're in college or at the end of their high school. It's from compounded work from the ages of 10 to 16, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's great insight for parents out there who are listening, and younger athletic trainers who are going to be taking care of players throughout their career, just to understand the sports specialization and kind of what Pitch Smart and USA Baseball and your work there are doing to kind of fix and help that issue. Obviously, a long way to go there. Well, Doogie, on another note, throughout your 25 years in the big leagues, you've accomplished an incredible amount. To name a few highlights, you worked the All-Star games in 2010 in Anaheim and 2021 in Denver at your home ballpark. Love to hear from you as someone who has done this twice, which is extremely rare. Share what that experience is like as an athletic trainer, to be around the game's best during the All-Star game and taking care of those players.
You mentioned those All-Star games. Those are definitely highlights in my career. I was very fortunate. I got to go to Japan too and travel with an All-Star team in 2018. You realize that they're the same athletes that you've had your whole life, from in professional sports, but they're the peak of their profession. And if you can do just a little thing to help those guys, it's pretty rewarding to someone in my position. I don't ever take credit or discredit too much. But if I know I worked my tail off to just help this player or this athlete, and number one, built a relationship with them that they would trust me with my input on how to help them, I think that's rewarding to me. And again, the whole key is kind of those relationships. And that besides watching the game and the elite all-stars, it's just kind of having the friendship and the bonding with some of these elite guys. They're just normal dudes when you get to know them, and I love that even former players I've had, I'm still in contact with. They'll be friends my whole life. And, when I'm getting at the tail end of my career, that's whether you're a player, a coach, or a trainer, or a strength coach, that's probably the part that everyone misses the most, right? It's kind of those bonding relationships.
Yeah, great insight there in terms of, baseball players are still people. They just might be on a bigger stage, and they're still kind of your colleagues and friends throughout the years. We'll get to wrap up today's episode. We're going to finish with a quick Q&A segment called Extra Bases. So I will ask you 4 quick questions and let you kind of share some insight into some of your favorite things about athletic training in baseball. So we will kick it off at first base. You have so much experience in the big leagues. You've worked in all the athletic training rooms across the league. Outside of your home athletic training room in Denver, what's your favorite training room to work in across the league?
Tough question already, right off the start. I really like Texas Rangers' new ballpark. Their visiting training room. The weight room is connected to it. The whirlpool room is connected but separate with doors. So you've got everything you need as an athletic trainer, and there's plenty of space. They just did a wonderful job in their design for me. I'm a big believer in strength coaches and the weight training, and that's the adjunct to athletic training for me. It's not separate departments. So anytime I could work real close relationship and see through a window or be connected to them, I really enjoy those facilities that have that.
Yeah, it's funny. We actually heard from a couple other people that being able to see through into the weight room in Texas is something that everybody loves. So cool to hear you echo that statement there. Moving on to second base, you and your colleagues across the league have a very unique opportunity every day to watch a game from a big league dugout, something people would kill to do. What's your favorite stadium to sit and watch a game from the dugout?
I love Wrigley. The history of that ballpark, just kind of, it's nostalgic still, even though they've kind of modernized it downstairs. But in the dugout itself, now that they remodeled it and there's room and you're not hitting your head on the top of the dugout every game, I just love watching a game right there. And I could lean on the cement wall that's been there for 100 years and think of, how many players have actually leaned against that same wall. So that's probably my favorite to watch a game. I wouldn't necessarily say that's my favorite stadium.
Yeah, totally agree. The history at some of those places like Wrigley and Fenway is just unmatched and really cool to see a game from. Moving on to third base. I know you're on the road a ton, maybe a little less now than in years past, and you love to get outdoors and do some activities outside. When you're traveling with the team, what's your favorite city to visit on the road?
San Diego, the weather is the same every time, 69 to 72, partly cloudy. It's gorgeous. I just feel refreshed when I'm in San Diego. I get up in the morning, I'll walk along the boardwalk in the bay, or you could go to the beach and walk to the actual stadium. I just love that. Anytime I can walk to a stadium. But, when the weather is perfect every single day, it's hard to say not to have San Diego on your top of your list.
Yeah, definitely a common answer and no argument for me on that one. Last question for today, moving on to home plate. You may have to think back quite a ways for this one, seeing as your vast amount of experience. But when you broke into the big leagues, or even, somewhere early on in your career, maybe even recently, did you ever have a major welcome to the big leagues moment?
Yeah, it wasn't just watching the game or getting in the big leagues. It was basically meeting your childhood heroes, right? Some Hall of Famers, some coaches that you watched on TV, and it was stuff you dreamed of, right, for me. And again, I tell people I have the best office in the world. My office is a dugout, right? It's 30 stadiums, and my home facility at Coors Field's beautiful. I love it. I go to Arizona where I am now. I love it here, and I go to Dominican. I love my office there. So, across the board, I'm energized every day to go to work, and I don't call it work. It's just something I do. I love going to work. Mm-hmm. When you get to watch baseball, like I do every day, I love baseball first and foremost. It's my favorite sport, so I'm pretty fortunate to get to do what I do.
Yeah, definitely a heck of a run with the Rockies, and have accomplished some amazing things throughout your career. Well, Doogie, we really appreciate you joining the show. Your time and your dedication to PBATS is unmatched, and we wish you and your staff in Colorado nothing but the best of luck this upcoming season.
Well, thank you, Sam, and thanks for having me on this podcast.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of Inside Athletic Training. We hope you've gained valuable insights, inspiration, and knowledge to fuel your athletic training journey. If you enjoyed today's show, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review on your favorite platform. And also, stay connected with us on pbats.com for more news about athletic training and sports medicine.